Just minutes later, at approximately 9 p.m., a 911 call came in that would mark the beginning of a tragedy no one could have imagined. A passing driver had spotted something unusual along Highway 147 near Farmville Baptist Church, not far from Route 280. Lying in the middle of the dark, isolated road was a young woman, barely moving, clearly in distress, and in desperate need of help. The caller described the scene with urgency, explaining that the girl appeared to be seriously injured and possibly unconscious. Several drivers began stopping in both directions, abandoning their vehicles in the roadway as they rushed to assist. It was a chaotic but compassionate moment, with strangers doing what they could to comfort someone they didn't know. When they reached her, the young woman was lying on her back, directly in the center of the road. Her breathing was shallow and labored, and her eyes struggled to stay open. Though no one knew it at the time, but that woman was Lauren Burke. Lauren Burke came into the world on December 30th, 1989, in the suburban city of Marietta, Georgia. During her time in high school, Lauren met a young man named Sean McQuaid. The two quickly formed a bond and began dating. Their connection remained strong after graduation, and both Lauren and Sean were accepted into Auburn University in Alabama. At Auburn, Lauren excelled academically and socially. She had a wide circle of friends and was admired for her drive, reliability, and sense of responsibility. These plans included not only her career aspirations, but also a long-term future with Sean. Life seemed to be falling into place just as she had hoped. On the morning of March 4th, 2008, Lauren began her day like any other. She met Sean for breakfast at a local cafe near campus, and the two enjoyed a pleasant, ordinary morning together. Afterward, she went to her scheduled class at 11 a.m., maintaining her usual punctuality. It was common for them to hang out in each other's rooms after class, providing support and companionship in the middle of their hectic college schedules. As the sun began to set and the evening rolled in, Lauren prepared to leave for another commitment she had made earlier in the day. At approximately 8 p.m., she said goodbye to Sean and left his dorm, heading out into the now darkened evening. Her black 2001 Honda Civic was parked nearby in the lot adjacent to the dormitory. She made her way toward it with the intention of driving to the university library to meet a classmate named Michael. The two of them had arranged to work on a study project together, and they had planned to meet at 8:30 p.m. to review notes and collaborate on the assignment. As the minutes ticked by, Michael waited at the library, expecting Lauren to arrive. When she failed to show up on time, he began calling her cell phone, assuming perhaps she had been delayed or lost track of time. His calls went unanswered at first, and concern began to grow. Eventually, Lauren picked up the phone. In a calm voice, she told Michael that she wasn't going to be able to make it to the library after all. She had completely forgotten about their meeting, she said, before abruptly hanging up. Just minutes later, at approximately 9 p.m., a call was placed to 911. A concerned passerby had spotted a young woman lying in the roadway near Farmville Baptist Church, along the stretch between the church and Route 280, on the 147 freeway. The caller reported that the girl appeared to be in distress and was in immediate need of assistance. Multiple cars stopped in both directions, blocking traffic as drivers rushed to help. The young woman, later confirmed to be Lauren Burke, was found lying on her back in the center of the road. Her breathing was shallow and labored, and she appeared to be barely conscious. The first police unit arrived on the scene at approximately 9:12 p.m. By that point, Lauren was no longer responsive. Emergency medical personnel arrived shortly after and began administering care immediately. As they loaded her into the ambulance, paramedics noted that her pulse was faint and irregular. She was taken directly to East Alabama Medical Center, arriving at 9:35 p.m., where a team of doctors began working urgently to stabilize her condition. Meanwhile, at 9:27 p.m., another call came into 911, this time reporting a car fire on the Auburn University campus. The vehicle, now engulfed in fire, could not be immediately traced to anyone at the scene. Police officers checked the license plate and quickly determined that the vehicle was registered to a James Burke, a resident of Georgia. Upon making contact with James Burke, investigators learned that the car belonged to his daughter, Lauren. James was stunned by the news. He asked the officers urgently what had happened to his daughter, but they had no answers at that moment. There was no one inside the vehicle when responders arrived, and the police could not immediately confirm Lauren's whereabouts. As the night continued, pieces of information slowly began to emerge, each one painting a more confusing and distressing picture than the last. Since Lauren had been admitted to the hospital unconscious and without any form of identification or personal belongings, medical staff initially had no way of knowing who she was. She had no wallet, ID, or phone. Nothing that could have provided them with her name or contact information. The trauma team worked tirelessly, administering emergency treatment and doing everything possible to stabilize her condition. But tragically, despite their most urgent efforts, the young woman could not be saved. Later, it was determined that the cause of Lauren's passing was a single wound caused by a firearm. The injury had critically affected both of her lungs, and based on medical and forensic evaluations, it was concluded that the shot had been fired at extremely close range, no more than a few inches away. This information helped investigators piece together important details about the nature of the incident. The specifics of the wound and the projectile's path strongly indicated that the act had occurred in a confined setting, which would later prove crucial to the case. Back at the Auburn Police Department, officers had already been processing the scene involving the burned vehicle found on campus. The black Honda Civic, which had been registered to Lauren's father, had been fully engulfed in flames. When they discovered that the young woman admitted to the hospital, unidentified at first, was not only missing but also the likely owner of the car, the connection became tragically clear. The puzzle pieces started to fall into place. By cross-referencing hospital records with the information from the car registration, the authorities were able to match the unidentified patient to the name Lauren Burke. Unfortunately, this realization came only after her passing. The very next morning, on March 5, 2008, Lauren's father, James Burke, made the difficult journey from Atlanta to Auburn. With a heavy heart, he arrived at the medical facility and confirmed what he had feared most. The young woman who had passed away the night before was indeed his daughter. With this identification complete, law enforcement agencies intensified their investigation. Both the location where Lauren had been discovered on the roadside and the area around her burned vehicle were designated as active crime scenes. Evidence technicians and forensic specialists combed through every inch of both areas. Lauren's car was transported to the Auburn Police Department for a detailed forensic analysis. The state's forensic lab and the Office of the State Fire Marshal sent in their teams to assist with the examination of the charred remains. Inside the vehicle, investigators discovered various fragments of burned material. Among the items recovered were remnants of clothing, Lauren's melted digital camera, and the partially intact owner's manual for the vehicle. Most notably, a .38 caliber bullet was discovered beneath the front seat. This key piece of evidence suggested a very troubling possibility: that the incident involving Lauren may have taken place inside the vehicle itself, and that the fire had been deliberately set in an attempt to conceal or destroy vital clues. Detectives began conducting interviews with Lauren's close friends, her boyfriend Sean, her roommate, and members of her family. None of them could identify a single individual who had ever expressed hostility toward her, or might have wanted to harm her. Because Lauren had spent part of the evening at Sean's dorm room before disappearing, investigators carefully reviewed any potential involvement on his part. They obtained a search warrant and examined his dormitory room, checking for anything suspicious or out of place. Ultimately, they found no evidence to suggest Sean had any connection to what had happened. His timeline aligned with what others reported, and there were no inconsistencies in his statements. Detectives also spoke with Michael, the classmate Lauren had agreed to meet at the library that evening. He recalled the brief phone call he had received from her shortly after 8 p.m., the same call in which Lauren unexpectedly told him she would not be coming after all. According to Michael, during that call, he heard background noise that sounded like a moving vehicle, indicating she was in transit or already inside a car. Another important development soon surfaced. Bank records revealed that Lauren's debit card had been used multiple times shortly after she was found. Surveillance footage from ATM machines and convenience stores was reviewed, and it became clear that someone had been attempting to access her account. Detectives believed it was likely the same person involved in Lauren's case. On the morning of March 7, 2008, just under 3 days after Lauren's passing, law enforcement in Newnan, Georgia, roughly 75 miles from Auburn, received a report of an attempted carjacking at a local Walmart. It was 9:55 a.m. when a man reportedly approached a woman as she was getting into her vehicle in the store's parking lot. According to witness accounts, the man confronted the woman, made verbal threats, and forced her to move to the passenger seat. He entered the driver's seat and attempted to leave the parking lot with her in the car. But within moments, the suspect noticed that a bystander who had witnessed the scene was following them while speaking urgently on the phone, presumably with 911. Realizing that the police may have already been alerted, the man abruptly turned around and drove back toward the Walmart. In a rushed attempt to escape unnoticed, he parked the vehicle and exited. He then ran to another car nearby, a silver Chrysler Sebring, quickly got inside, and drove away at high speed. Just hours later, law enforcement officers from several nearby jurisdictions located the Chrysler and began pursuit. The car was heading in the direction of Columbus, Georgia, and the chase quickly escalated into a high-speed pursuit along major roads and highways. Officers noted that the driver refused to stop, and his reckless driving created a dangerous situation for others on the road. During the pursuit, law enforcement observed the driver tossing something out the window. Officers who were not directly involved in the chase stopped to retrieve the discarded object. After a search along the roadside, they located what appeared to be a .38 caliber revolver, consistent with the type of bullet previously recovered from Lauren's vehicle. This was a major break in the case and added further urgency to the pursuit. As the chase continued, the Chrysler began showing signs of mechanical failure. Smoke started rising from under the hood, and the car's performance dropped rapidly. The road where the suspect's vehicle finally came to a halt was a narrow stretch that cut through a heavily wooded area just outside the city. Surrounded on both sides by dense forest, it provided few escape routes. Once the car could no longer run, its engine smoking and struggling, the driver sprang from the vehicle in a last-ditch effort to avoid capture. Without hesitation, he bolted into the trees, hoping that the shadows and thickness of the woods would shield him from view. But his attempted flight was short-lived. Law enforcement officers, already in pursuit and working in coordination, closed in quickly. The suspect had barely made it more than a few yards into the underbrush before officers caught up. He was ordered to the ground, restrained, and placed in handcuffs with minimal resistance. His name was Courtney Lero Lockhart. He was born on October 20th, 1984, and had grown up like many other boys. According to his family, he had once been cheerful, sociable, and full of life. People close to him described him as someone who enjoyed making others laugh and who never seemed weighed down by life's burdens. But everything changed after Lockhart enlisted in the U.S. Army. In 2004, he was deployed to Iraq. And when he returned in 2005, those who knew him said he came back a completely different person. "He wasn't the Courtney I knew," his mother would later say in an emotional interview. The young man who used to smile easily and joke around became distant, anxious, and unpredictable. According to family accounts, he grew increasingly withdrawn and showed visible signs of emotional distress. He reportedly never allowed anyone to walk behind him, flinched at sudden movements, and would sometimes hide under beds or in closets, behavior that suggested deep psychological struggles. He was no longer the son, friend, or brother they remembered. In 2006, Lockhart's personal life took a new turn when he and a former girlfriend welcomed a daughter. However, the relationship had already ended by then, and the responsibilities of fatherhood appeared to do little to stabilize his mental health. That same year, his military record took a sharp downturn. He was court-martialed for multiple violations, including assaulting fellow soldiers, unauthorized absence, and the use of prohibited substances. These infractions led to a dishonorable discharge in December 2006, after he had served 7 months in military detention. Following his return to civilian life, Lockhart's behavior became increasingly erratic. In early 2008, he embarked on a troubling pattern of criminal activity. According to police reports and later court records, he committed a series of robberies, mostly targeting women in public spaces such as parking lots. His method was disturbingly consistent. He would wait for a woman to approach her car, often in dimly lit or isolated areas, confront her from behind, brandish a weapon, demand her purse, and attempt to steal her vehicle. While one of these incidents targeted a convenience store, nearly all of the others followed this same pattern. This spree of offenses would culminate in the case that shocked an entire community. The life of 18-year-old Lauren Burke, an Auburn University student described by friends as intelligent, compassionate, and full of promise, was cut short during one of Lockhart's attempted robberies. After his arrest, the 23-year-old was transported to the local police station for questioning. It was during this interrogation, later recorded on video and used as critical evidence in court, that Lockhart openly confessed to his involvement in Lauren Burke's case. The video recording captured his demeanor, his words, and his detailed description of the events that unfolded on the evening of March 4, 2008. Authorities also discovered additional evidence linking him to the crime. Items that had belonged to Lauren, including her iPod, debit cards, and other personal belongings, were recovered from Lockhart's car. These discoveries added further credibility to his statement and supported the account of events he had provided during the interview. According to Lockhart, that day had started like many others during that period of his life, adrift and aimless. On the morning of March 4th, he awoke inside his vehicle and, needing cash, began driving through Auburn in search of someone to rob. He eventually made his way onto the Auburn University campus and parked near a cluster of student dormitories. There, he waited. For hours, he sat in his car, observing students come and go. He watched them head to class, meet friends, and go about their daily routines. At approximately 8 p.m., he noticed a young woman walking alone toward a nearby vehicle. She appeared relaxed and unaware of any danger. She was simply heading to her car, like countless students do every evening. That young woman was Lauren Burke. Acting impulsively, Lockhart grabbed his revolver and got out of his vehicle. As Lauren reached her car and opened the door, he approached from behind. He pressed the weapon against her and asked how much money she had with her. When she didn't respond immediately, he forced her into the passenger seat and climbed behind the wheel himself. According to his later confession, Lauren screamed in fear but didn't physically resist. After she calmed down somewhat, she took $200 from her purse and handed it to him, pleading for him to let her go. Rather than doing so, Lockhart drove around the city with Lauren still inside the car. At some point during the drive, her phone began to ring. It was Michael, her classmate, calling to check in, since they had agreed to meet at the university library. Lockhart instructed Lauren to answer the call and act as if everything was fine. She told Michael that she had forgotten about the meeting and quickly hung up, just as Lockhart had instructed. As they continued driving, they eventually found themselves on Highway 147, a relatively quiet stretch of road. At one moment, Lauren saw an opportunity. She opened the car door and attempted to escape while the vehicle was still moving. In the confusion and chaos of that moment, Lockhart later claimed, the weapon in his possession discharged. The bullet caused critical internal injuries, and Lauren also suffered harm from the fall. Despite her injuries, Lauren managed to make it to the roadside. According to witnesses, she tried to signal for help, waving her arms as passing drivers began to stop. Her determination to survive in that final moment left a lasting impression on those who saw her. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but her condition had already become dire. The series of events that began with Lockhart's decision to drive through Auburn that day ended in tragedy. But it also set in motion a complex investigation that brought answers to Lauren's grieving family. It provided the foundation for a legal process that would seek accountability and justice for a young woman. Realizing that it was only a matter of time before law enforcement arrived at the scene, Courtney Lockhart knew he needed to act fast. With Lauren no longer in the car and the situation escalating rapidly, he shifted his focus to covering his tracks. Aware that valuable evidence, both forensic and personal, remained inside the vehicle, Lockhart made the calculated decision to eliminate any trace of his connection to the crime. He drove directly to a nearby gas station, a decision made not only out of practicality but also panic. Surveillance footage would later show him walking into the station, purchasing a red fuel container and filling it with gasoline. Instead of using his own money, he swiped Lauren's bank card to pay, a move that further tied him to her disappearance and would later serve as a digital breadcrumb in the investigation. Once he had the gasoline, he returned to the vehicle and began pouring the fuel liberally throughout the car's interior. The intention was clear: to destroy any remaining evidence. With the interior now doused in gasoline, Lockhart got back behind the wheel. He drove toward the Auburn University campus, the same location where he had first encountered Lauren just hours earlier, because his silver Chrysler Sebring was still parked there. However, as he drove, something unexpected occurred. The overpowering smell of gasoline inside the vehicle began to make him dizzy. The fumes, trapped within the confined space, were intense and disorienting. To avoid losing control, he rolled down the windows in an effort to let fresh air in, allowing the toxic fumes to escape and giving himself a moment of clarity to complete his plan. Despite his attempt to appear methodical, investigators later concluded that many of Lockhart's actions were erratic and inconsistent. Although he claimed he had not intended for things to escalate to the level they did, the steps he took to cover up the incident suggested otherwise. One of the primary points of contention in the case would revolve around Lockhart's assertion that the gun had discharged accidentally. Authorities and forensic experts were highly skeptical of this explanation. From the outset, investigators found it difficult to accept the claim that Lauren had been harmed by accident. Courtney Lockhart had served in the U.S. Army and had undergone formal weapons training. He was no stranger to firearms and, by all accounts, understood the basic rules of firearm safety. This background made the idea of an accidental discharge appear highly unlikely in the eyes of experienced detectives. To them, it seemed far more plausible that Lauren, sensing that she might never be allowed to go free, made a desperate decision to escape the moving vehicle, and Lockhart responded with force to stop her. Forensic testing soon confirmed what investigators had suspected. The bullet found lodged inside Lauren's Honda Civic, recovered earlier from the Auburn campus, was conclusively matched to the revolver that Lockhart had thrown out the window during the high-speed police chase that ultimately led to his arrest. Ballistics testing and gun analysis demonstrated that the shot had not discharged spontaneously or due to a malfunction. In fact, experts performed multiple simulations and examinations, all of which ruled out the possibility of an accidental firing. The angle of the bullet, the force, and the mechanics of the firearm all aligned with an intentional trigger pull. On the day following Lockhart's arrest, he was formally charged with multiple felonies in connection with the abduction and passing of Lauren Burke. These charges included kidnapping, robbery, and capital murder, each carrying severe penalties under Alabama law. The case, which had already shaken the Auburn community, now entered the public spotlight, drawing intense media attention. The trial officially began on November 8, 2010, more than 2 years after Lauren's passing. During opening statements, the defense attorneys introduced a strategy focused on Lockhart's mental health. They argued that his conduct during and after the incident was influenced by psychological trauma related to his military service. According to their claims, Lockhart did not fully comprehend his actions and lacked the intent required for a capital conviction. They further maintained that the incident involving Lauren had not been premeditated, and that the shooting was the result of a moment of fear and confusion rather than a calculated act. To support this narrative, the defense presented testimony from a licensed psychologist who had evaluated Lockhart. The psychologist reported that Lockhart had an IQ of 86, placing him below the national average, though not in a range qualifying for intellectual disability. Additionally, the psychologist noted that Lockhart had exhibited symptoms associated with combat-related stress and anxiety. However, the psychologist made it clear that while Lockhart had emotional challenges, there was no evidence that he suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, a diagnosis commonly seen in combat veterans. His decision-making was described as impulsive, and he struggled to cope with high-stress situations. While this testimony was designed to evoke sympathy and suggest diminished capacity, it failed to convince many in the courtroom that Lockhart's behavior should be seen through a purely psychological lens. Meanwhile, the prosecution attempted to present a broader picture of Lockhart's conduct, including prior crimes and details about his dishonorable discharge from the Army. However, the trial judge ruled that this information could not be admitted into evidence, determining it might unfairly prejudice the jury. As a result, the jury was left to consider only the evidence directly related to Lauren's case. Following the conclusion of the guilt phase, the sentencing phase began immediately. The court had already determined that the abduction and loss of life occurred during the commission of another felony, an aggravating circumstance under state law. The jury was asked to weigh multiple factors, including Lockhart's actions, his background, and the psychological testimony provided by the defense. Ultimately, the jury rendered a recommendation of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Their decision reflected a desire for accountability, while allowing for Lockhart's alleged mental and emotional state to factor into the sentencing outcome. In a highly consequential and rare move, the trial judge chose to override the jury's recommendation. After reviewing additional materials and evidence not presented during the trial, including Lockhart's prior offenses, the judge issued a more severe sentence. He sentenced Courtney Lockhart to death, stating that had the jury been made aware of the full scope of Lockhart's history, they likely would have reached a different conclusion. The judge emphasized that the case involved not only a loss of life, but also a deliberate and calculated series of actions intended to avoid detection and obstruct justice. As of today, over 15 years have passed since the tragic events that took Lauren Burke's life. Courtney Lockhart remains on death row in Alabama. His legal team has filed multiple appeals in an effort to have the sentence overturned or reduced, but none have been successful thus far.